My name is Hannah Whitaker, and I used to believe that love was enough to conquer anything. That was before I learned that some people are born with hearts made of paper, beautiful to look at, but they dissolve the moment life gets real. The morning of what should have been my wedding day started like a scene from a fairy tale. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains of my childhood bedroom in Willow Falls, Tennessee, casting delicate shadows across the vintage gown that had taken me 8 months to save for. The dress hung there like a promise, ivory silk cascading to the floor with tiny pearl buttons that caught the light just so. I could hear my mother downstairs, her voice pitched with that particular brand of excitement that comes from months of planning. The caterers had arrived at dawn, and I caught glimpses of white tablecloths being spread across the lawn through my window. 73 guests would be arriving in 4 hours, each one expecting to witness Cameron Blake and me pledge our lives to each other beneath the old oak tree where my grandparents had exchanged their own vows 60 years ago. My phone buzzed against the nightstand. Cameron's name lit up the screen, and I smiled, expecting some sweet pre-wedding message about how he couldn't wait to see me walking down the aisle. Instead, his voice came through tight and strained. "Hannah, I can't do this." The words hit me like ice water. "What do you mean you can't do this? Cameron, it's our wedding day." "I know what day it is." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But I can't marry you. I thought I could. But I can't." The phone went dead. I stared at the screen, waiting for it to ring again, waiting for him to call back and tell me this was some terrible joke. But the silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of my mother's laughter drifting up from downstairs and the distant clatter of dishes being arranged. My legs gave out. I sank onto the bed, still clutching the phone, the wedding dress swaying gently in the breeze from the open window. This couldn't be happening. Not today. Not after everything we'd planned. Everything we'd dreamed about. A knock at the door made me jump. "Hannah, sweetie, are you almost ready? The photographer wants to start with some getting ready shots." I opened my mouth to answer, but no sound came out. How do you tell your mother that the wedding she's been planning for a year isn't going to happen? How do you explain that the man she'd grown to love like a son had just shattered everything with a 3-minute phone call? "Hannah?" The concern in her voice was growing. "I'm fine, Mom." I managed to croak out. "Just give me a few more minutes." But I wasn't fine. I was drowning. The walls of my childhood bedroom seemed to be closing in, and I could feel panic rising in my chest like floodwater. I tried calling Cameron back, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried texting, but the messages went undelivered. 30 minutes later, when I still hadn't emerged, my mother came in without knocking. She took one look at my face and knew. "What happened?" "He's not coming." The words felt like glass in my throat. Cameron called it off. What followed was chaos. My mother's face went white, then red, then white again. She started pacing, muttering about deposits and flowers and how she was going to kill that boy with her bare hands. My father appeared in the doorway, took one look at the scene, and quietly closed the door behind him. "We have to tell everyone," my mother said, her voice rising with each word. "We have to call the guests, cancel the caterers. Oh God, what are we going to do with all that food?" I watched her spiral, feeling disconnected from my own body. The practical concerns felt absurd in the face of the gaping wound in my chest. Who cared about the flowers or the food? The man I'd planned to spend my life with had just walked away like I meant nothing. "I can't stay here," I whispered. "What?" My mother stopped pacing. "I can't stay here. I can't face everyone. I can't watch you clean up the mess of my life." "Hannah, you're in shock. You need to sit down, have some water. I need to leave." I stood up, surprised by how steady my legs felt. Something had shifted inside me, some primal survival instinct kicking in. I couldn't stay in this house, in this town, surrounded by the wreckage of my future. I needed to run. As if summoned by my desperation. My phone rang. Aunt Callie's name appeared on the screen. "Come to me," she said without preamble. She'd always been able to read me like a book, even from 3 states away. Aunt Callie, pack a bag, get on the next bus, come to me. And just like that, I had an escape route. 2 hours later, I was sitting in the back of a Greyhound bus, still wearing my wedding dress. I'd thrown a sweater over it and stuffed my veil into a plastic grocery bag. But there was no hiding what I was. The other passengers stared, some with pity, others with curiosity. I kept my eyes fixed on the window, watching Tennessee countryside roll by in a blur of green and gold. The bus ride to Aunt Callie's town took 4 hours. 4 hours of sitting in wedding silk, feeling like a ghost of the person I'd been that morning. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends and family, but I couldn't bring myself to read them. What was there to say? That I'd been abandoned? That I'd clearly been living in a fantasy? When the bus finally pulled into the station, I saw Aunt Callie waiting for me, her wild silver hair catching the late afternoon sun. She was wearing her usual uniform of paint-splattered jeans and a flannel shirt, looking like she'd just stepped out of an art studio. Which, knowing her, she probably had. She took one look at me and wrapped me in a hug that smelled like turpentine and lavender. "Oh, honey," she murmured against my hair. "Oh, my sweet girl." I started to cry then, really cry, for the first time since Cameron's call. All the shock and numbness melted away, leaving raw grief in its wake. Aunt Callie held me while I sobbed, right there in the bus station, not caring who saw or what they thought. "I'm taking you somewhere," she said when my tears finally slowed. "Not to my house, somewhere else, somewhere quiet." We drove through the outskirts of town, past houses I didn't recognize, until we reached a narrow dirt road that led to a small red brick building sitting alone in a field. A faded sign hung crooked above the door. The Juniper Hearth. "What is this place?" I asked as Aunt Callie parked the car. "It used to be a bakery. Been closed for 12 years now. I bought it a few months ago. Been meaning to fix it up. But..." She shrugged. "Sometimes places need to stay broken for a while." The door creaked when she opened it, and we stepped into what felt like a time capsule. The walls were covered in peeling floral wallpaper, and dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight streaming through dirty windows. But underneath the neglect, I could see the bones of something beautiful. Display cases lined one wall, and behind them stood an enormous iron oven that looked like it had been built to last centuries. The woman who owned this place, Ramona Pierce, she was something special. Aunt Callie said, running her hand along the wooden counter. "Made the best bread in 3 counties. People used to drive for hours just to buy her sourdough." I walked deeper into the space, my wedding dress rustling against the dusty floor. There was something about the place that felt peaceful, sacred almost, like a church where the prayers had been made of flour and yeast. "There's a small apartment upstairs," Aunt Callie continued. "Nothing fancy, but it's got a bed and a bathroom. You can stay here as long as you need." I turned to look at her. This woman who'd always been the free spirit of our family. The one who'd chosen art over marriage, adventure over security. "Why here?" "Because nobody will knock on this door," she said simply. "And because sometimes we need to be somewhere that's as broken as we are." That night, I lay in the narrow bed upstairs, still wearing my wedding dress. I couldn't bring myself to take it off. It felt like the only thing tethering me to who I used to be, before my world imploded. The building creaked and settled around me, and I found the sounds oddly comforting. I whispered to the darkness, "I'm not anyone's almost wife." The words felt like a declaration, a line drawn in the sand. I'd been defined by my relationship with Cameron for so long that I'd forgotten who I was without him. But lying there in that abandoned bakery, surrounded by the ghosts of someone else's dreams, I realized I had a choice. I could let his betrayal destroy me, or I could use it to build something new. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through windows I could barely see through. The dirt and grime of 12 years of neglect had turned them nearly opaque. I stood up, my dress wrinkled beyond repair, and made my first decision of my new life. I was going to clean this place. I started with the windows, scrubbing away years of dust and dirt with old rags I found in a supply closet. As the glass cleared, more light poured in. revealing details I'd missed in the dim lighting of the day before. The display cases were carved with intricate patterns of wheat and vines. The walls, beneath their peeling paper, were solid brick. And the oven, the massive iron beast that dominated the back wall, was a thing of beauty, all curves and ornate metalwork. As I worked, I found myself thinking about the woman who'd owned this place, Ramona Pierce. What had her life been like? What had driven her to bake bread in this little building on the edge of town? And why had she closed it all down? I asked Aunt Callie about her that evening when she came by to check on me. Ramona? Aunt Callie smiled. She was a force of nature, tiny little thing, but she could command a room full of men twice her size. She had this way of looking at you that made you feel like she could see right through to your soul. Why did she close the bakery? Her husband died. After that, she just lost interest. Said bread was meant to be shared, and she didn't have anyone to share it with anymore. Aunt Callie's voice grew soft. She moved out to a lavender farm in Ash Hollow, still lives there, far as I know. Do you think she'd mind if I visited her? Aunt Callie raised an eyebrow. Planning to take up baking? I hadn't been, but something about the idea felt right. Maybe. I don't know. I just feel like I need to understand this place. 3 days later, I drove out to Ash Hollow. The lavender farm was easy to find. The scent hit me a mile before I reached the property. Ramona Pierce's house was a small cottage surrounded by purple fields that seemed to stretch to the horizon. The woman who answered the door was indeed tiny, probably no more than 5 feet tall. But she had the kind of presence that filled a room. Her hair was silver white, pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes were the color of storm clouds. She looked me up and down with those eyes, taking in my appearance with the kind of thorough assessment I imagined she'd once given to her bread dough. You must be the girl who's been cleaning up my old place, she said without preamble. Yes. Ma'am. I'm Hannah Whitaker. Callie's niece. I heard about what happened. Come in. Her cottage was exactly what I'd expected, cozy and cluttered, with herbs hanging from the ceiling and the smell of rosemary and vinegar in the air. She led me to a small kitchen table and poured 2 cups of tea without asking if I wanted any. So, she said, settling into the chair across from me. You want to learn to bake. It wasn't a question. I'd been planning to ease into the topic. But apparently, Ramona Pierce didn't have time for social niceties. I think I do, I said. I'm not sure why, but being in your old bakery, it feels like something I'm supposed to do. She studied me for a long moment. You know anything about bread? I can make a loaf from a box mix. Ramona snorted. Box mix? That's not bread, that's edible cardboard. She leaned forward. Real bread is alive. It breathes. It grows. It has moods. You can't fake your way through it. If you're not committed, if you're not willing to fail 100 times before you succeed once, then you're wasting my time. I'm willing to fail. Are you? Her eyes narrowed. Because I don't teach quitters. I don't teach people who are looking for a hobby to fill the time. I teach people who understand that bread is a language, and if you want to speak it, you have to mean every word. I thought about Cameron, about how he'd given up on us without a fight, about how I'd spent years molding myself into what I thought he wanted, only to be discarded when it became inconvenient. I'm tired of being soft, I said. Teach me to be tough. Something shifted in Ramona's expression. Not quite approval, but recognition. We'll start tomorrow. 5 a.m. Don't be late. And so began the strangest apprenticeship of my life. Every morning, I'd drive out to Ramona's cottage, where she'd already have ingredients laid out on her kitchen table. She taught me about yeast first, how it was a living thing that needed warmth and food and time to do its work, how you couldn't rush it or bully it into compliance. The dough knows what you're afraid of, she told me one morning as I struggled with a particularly stubborn batch of sourdough. Don't lie to it. My first loaves were disasters, flat, burned, dense as bricks. Ramona would examine each failure with the intensity of a surgeon, pointing out where I'd gone wrong. Too much flour, not enough kneading, oven too hot, timing off. The list of my mistakes seemed endless. But slowly, something began to change. My hands, soft from years of office work, grew calloused and strong. My timing improved. I learned to read the dough, to feel when it was ready, to trust my instincts instead of constantly second-guessing myself. The day I finally produced a loaf that earned Ramona's grudging nod of approval was one of the best days of my life. It was a simple white bread, nothing fancy, but it had a golden crust and a soft, airy interior that tasted like everything I'd been working toward. "Now you're beginning to understand," Ramona said, tearing off a piece and chewing thoughtfully. "Bread is about more than ingredients. It's about patience. It's about believing in something even when you can't see the results yet." I started bringing my practice loaves back to the juniper hearth, working on small batches in the evenings after my lessons with Ramona. The old oven, which had seemed so intimidating at first, began to feel like an old friend. I learned its quirks, its hot spots, the way it held heat differently depending on the weather. Word began to spread, as it always does in small towns. Addie, the girl who worked at the general store, stopped by one evening just as I was pulling a batch of cinnamon rolls from the oven. "Oh my God," she said, breathing in the aroma. "That smells like heaven." I offered her one, partly out of politeness and partly because I was curious what someone else would think of my work. She took a bite and her eyes went wide. "This tastes like my grandmother's hug," she said. And I knew she meant it as the highest compliment. By the end of the month, I had a small but steady stream of visitors. Word-of-mouth advertising is powerful in a place where everyone knows everyone else's business. People would stop by in the evenings, drawn by the smell of fresh bread, and leave with a loaf tucked under their arm and a smile on their face. I started keeping a leather notebook where I wrote down my recipes, my experiments, my failures and successes. It became a diary of sorts, a record of my transformation from broken-hearted almost bride to something I'd never imagined I could be. And then, on a Tuesday morning in October, Cameron showed up. I was in the middle of shaping sourdough loaves when I heard a car pull up outside. I looked through the window and saw his familiar blue Toyota, the same car he'd driven to pick me up for our first date 3 years ago. My heart jumped into my throat, but I forced myself to keep working, to keep my hands moving in the steady rhythm Ramona had taught me. He knocked on the door, tentative at first, then with more confidence when I didn't answer immediately. I took my time washing my hands, smoothing my apron, preparing myself for whatever was about to happen. When I finally opened the door, he was standing there with that same nervous smile I'd fallen in love with, the one that used to make me forgive him for being late, for forgetting important dates, for all the small ways he'd disappointed me. "Hannah," he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "I've been looking for you everywhere." "Have you?" I stayed in the doorway, not inviting him in. "Your parents wouldn't tell me where you were. I finally got it out of your cousin." He looked past me into the bakery, taking in the clean windows, the smell of fresh bread, the life I'd built in his absence. "This is... wow. I had no idea you were interested in baking. There are a lot of things you didn't know about me." He winced. "I deserve that, Hannah. I've made a terrible mistake. The biggest mistake of my life." "Which mistake was that? Calling off our wedding or waiting 4 months to tell me about it?" "Both. All of it." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing. "I got scared. Cold feet, I guess. I thought marriage would change everything, make me feel trapped. But these past few months without you, I've been miserable." I watched him squirm, waiting for the surge of satisfaction I'd expected to feel. But instead, I felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, no desire to make him suffer the way he'd made me suffer. Just a profound sense of distance, like I was watching this conversation happen to someone else. "I want to try again," he continued. "I want to make this right. We can have a small ceremony, just family, nothing fancy. I know I hurt you, but we can work through this." Can we? I leaned against the doorframe, studying his face. Tell me something, Cameron. Do you miss me? Or do you just miss being forgiven? What kind of question is that? An honest one. He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. In that moment of hesitation, I saw everything I needed to know. He didn't miss me. He missed the idea of me. The comfort of having someone who would always be there, who would always take him back no matter how badly he behaved. I'm not the same person I was 4 months ago, I said finally. The woman you left at the altar doesn't exist anymore. People don't change that much in 4 months, don't they? I stepped back into the bakery, and after a moment's hesitation, he followed. The space was transformed from when he would have seen it last, if he'd ever bothered to visit before. The walls were painted a warm cream color, the display cases gleamed, and the air was filled with the scent of rising dough and cinnamon. It was a place that breathed life and warmth, a place where people came to nourish their bodies and souls. This is impressive, he said, and I could hear the condescension in his voice. A nice little hobby. It's not a hobby. Well, no, of course not. I didn't mean. It's my life. I turned to face him fully. This is who I am now. This is what I do. I wake up at 4 in the morning to start the first batch of bread. I spend my days with flour under my fingernails and yeast starters that need to be fed like pets. I go to bed exhausted and wake up excited to do it all again. He looked confused, like I was speaking a foreign language. But what about your real career? Your job at the marketing firm? I quit. You quit? Hannah, that's crazy. You can't just throw away your future for this? And there it was. The fundamental difference between us laid bare. To him, what I'd built was just this, something quaint and temporary. A phase I'd grow out of when I came to my senses. He couldn't see the artistry in a perfectly shaped loaf, the science in the way gluten developed, the community that formed around a shared table. I think you should go, I said quietly. Hannah, please. I know I hurt you, but we can work through this. I love you. No, you don't. The words came out calm and certain. You love the idea of me. You love having someone who will adjust their dreams to fit around yours. But you don't love me. That's not true. When's my birthday? What? My birthday. When is it? He faltered. October 15th? 23rd. We dated for 3 years. Cameron. 3 years. And you don't even know when my birthday is. That doesn't mean anything. I'm bad with dates. You're bad with me. I walked to the door and held it open. I forgive you for leaving me at the altar. I forgive you for breaking my heart. But I don't want you back. He stood there for a long moment, and I could see him struggling to process what was happening. In his mind, the script was simple. He'd made a mistake. He'd come to apologize, and I'd take him back because that's what I always did. The idea that I might have moved on, that I might have found something better, had never occurred to him. This isn't over, he said finally. Yes, it is. After he left, I stood in the quiet bakery, surrounded by the tools of my trade and the smell of my success. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated. Instead, I felt sad, not for the loss of him, but for the loss of the girl I'd been who thought so little of herself that she'd have taken him back. 2 weeks later, Ben Latham walked into my life. I was working on a new recipe, a honey oat loaf that had been giving me trouble, when I heard the bell above the door chime. I looked up to see a tall man in his 30s, with kind eyes and work-worn hands, standing uncertainly in the doorway. I'm sorry, he said. I wasn't sure if you were open. We're not officially open yet, I said, wiping my hands on my apron. But I've got fresh bread if you're interested. He approached the counter, and I noticed he moved with the careful deliberation of someone who spent a lot of time on his feet. I'm Ben Latham. I own a food distribution company about 50 miles north of here. I've been hearing stories about this place. Stories? People talking about the best bread they've ever tasted, saying it's worth the drive. He smiled. I had to see for myself. I cut him a slice of the honey oat loaf, still warm from the oven. He took a bite and closed his eyes, chewing slowly, thoughtfully. "This is exceptional," he said finally. "The texture, the flavor, it's professional quality. Better than professional." "Thank you. I'm not just being polite. I work with bakeries all over the region. This is the real deal." He paused. "Have you thought about expanding, selling to restaurants, grocery stores?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't really thought that far ahead. "You should. There's a market for bread like this. A big market." He pulled a business card from his pocket. "I'd like to talk to you about distribution, not buying you out, partnering with you. You'd maintain complete control over the product, and I'd help you get it to people who want it." I took the card, feeling the weight of possibility in my hands. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. But don't think too long. Quality like this doesn't stay secret forever." That night, I called Aunt Callie and told her about Ben's offer. "What does your gut tell you?" she asked. "That it's scary, that I'm not ready, that I don't know enough about business to make this kind of decision." All of that's probably true, but that's not what I asked. I thought about it. My gut says yes, that this is the next step. Then you have your answer. The next month was a whirlwind of paperwork, health inspections, and sleepless nights. Ben was patient and thorough, walking me through every step of the process. He helped me understand contracts, profit margins, and production schedules. More importantly, he listened to my concerns and never made me feel stupid for asking questions. "The secret," he told me one evening as we worked on a business plan, "is to grow slowly. Don't try to be everything to everyone. Focus on what you do best and do it better than anyone else." 3 months later, the Juniper Hearth had its official reopening. I'd hired Addie from the general store, along with Jonah, a former restaurant cook who'd moved to town to take care of his aging father, and Maria, a local teenager who had a gift for customer service. We started with limited hours, Thursdays through Sundays, opening at 7 and closing when we sold out. We sold out every day. The success was intoxicating, but it was also exhausting. I found myself working 16-hour days, managing inventory, training staff, and still doing most of the baking myself. Ben kept reminding me that I needed to delegate more, but I struggled to let go of control. "You're going to burn out," he warned me one evening as we went over sales figures. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're running on pure adrenaline and stubbornness." He leaned back in his chair. "When's the last time you took a full day off?" I couldn't remember. "This is what it takes to build something." "No, this is what it takes to destroy something. You're not a machine, Hannah. You're allowed to rest." I wanted to argue with him, but I was too tired. The truth was, I was terrified of slowing down, of losing the momentum we'd built. I'd worked so hard to become someone new, someone strong and independent, that the idea of showing weakness felt like a betrayal of everything I'd accomplished. "What if I step back and everything falls apart?" I asked. "Then we'll put it back together." "But what if you don't step back and you fall apart? What happens then?" It was a fair question. I agreed to take Sundays off, to let my staff handle the reopening while I focused on planning and development. It was terrifying at first, but gradually, I learned to trust the people I'd hired. They were good at their jobs, and they cared about the bakery almost as much as I did. With a little more breathing room, I started to see possibilities I'd missed before. Ben had been right about expanding, but not in the way I'd originally imagined. Instead of trying to be everywhere at once, I focused on creating an experience that people couldn't get anywhere else. I started hosting bread-making classes on Sunday afternoons, teaching people the basics of working with yeast and dough. I partnered with local farms to source ingredients, creating a network of suppliers who shared my commitment to quality. I even convinced Ramona to come out of retirement to teach a monthly masterclass in sourdough. The classes were popular, but more than that, they were fulfilling. There was something magical about watching someone's face light up when they pulled their first successful loaf from the oven. It reminded me why I'd fallen in love with baking in the first place. 6 months after the reopening, Ben made another proposal. "There's a piece of land for sale about a mile down the road," he said. "Perfect for a second location, or maybe a production facility." "Another location?" "You've proved the concept here. People are willing to drive an hour for your bread. Imagine what would happen if you made it more accessible." I walked the property with him the next day. It was beautiful. 5 acres of rolling hills with a view of the mountains in the distance. I could picture it. A larger bakery, maybe a cafe, gardens where we could grow our own herbs and vegetables. "It's perfect," I said, "but I can't afford it." "We can afford it. Partnership, remember?" I looked at him, this man who'd believed in me when I barely believed in myself. "Why are you doing this? Why are you investing so much in me?" "Because you're going to change the way people think about bread, about food, about community." He picked up a handful of soil and let it run through his fingers. "Besides, it's not charity. I think we're going to make a lot of money together." That night, I sat in the quiet bakery, surrounded by the tools and ingredients of my trade. My wedding dress still hung in the closet upstairs, but I hadn't looked at it in months. It belonged to a different person, a different life. I opened my leather notebook and wrote, "He left me in white lace and broken promises. But what I've built from flour and fire, that's mine. Forever." The next morning, I called Ben and told him to make an offer on the land. The second location took a year to complete. We built it from the ground up, designing every detail to maximize both efficiency and beauty. The main bakery was 3 times the size of the original, with state-of-the-art ovens and a glass wall that let customers watch the baking process. The cafe could seat 50 people and opened onto a patio overlooking the herb gardens. The day we opened, there was a line around the block, standing behind the counter, watching families share fresh bread and couples linger over coffee. I felt a profound sense of completion, not the completion that comes from checking items off a list, but the deeper satisfaction of becoming who you were meant to be. Ramona was there, of course, sampling everything with her usual critical eye. "Not bad," she said, which from her was high praise. Aunt Callie had driven in from 3 states away, her latest painting tucked under her arm as a gift. "I'm proud of you," she said, and I could see tears in her eyes. Even my parents had come, cautiously supportive after months of trying to understand my new life. My mother kept asking when I was going to settle down. But I could see she was beginning to realize that I already had. As the day wound down and the crowds thinned, I found myself alone in the original bakery. The juniper hearth had become the heart of a small empire. But this was where it all began. This was where I'd learned that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about what you build when you get back up. I heard footsteps on the stairs and turned to see Ben coming down from the apartment above. He'd been helping me move some old equipment, and his shirt was dusty with flour. "All settled up there?" I asked. "Yeah, everything's ready for the new tenant." He paused, looking around the space. "You sure you want to rent it out? You could keep it as an office or a private workspace." "No, it should be lived in. It's been empty too long." We stood there in comfortable silence, both of us thinking about the journey that had brought us to this moment. Ben had become more than a business partner over the past year. He'd become a friend, a confidant, someone I could trust with my dreams and fears. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small wooden box, hand-carved with the same wheat and vine pattern that decorated the original display cases. Inside was a key, old and brass, with a tag that read, "Master Baker." "Ramona asked me to give this to you. She said it was the key to the original ovens, back when this place first opened. She thought you should have it." I took the key, feeling its weight in my palm. It was warm, as if it had been waiting for me all along. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it for more than just the key. "Thank you for letting me be part of this." He gestured around the bakery. "I've worked with a lot of people over the years, but I've never seen anyone transform the way you have. You're not the same person I met that first day." He was right. The woman who'd been left at the altar in a wedding dress felt like a character from a book I'd read long ago. I'd shed that skin slowly, painfully, the way a snake sheds its old scales. What remained was harder, more resilient, but also more alive. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Cameron hadn't called off the wedding, I said. If I'd gone through with it, lived the life I thought I wanted. Do you regret that it didn't happen? I thought about it, really thought about it. No. I used to think he broke me, but he didn't. He just freed me. Freed me to become who I was supposed to be. And who is that? I smiled, looking around the bakery one more time. Someone who makes bread, someone who feeds people, someone who knows that the best revenge isn't getting back at the people who hurt you. It's becoming so genuinely happy that their opinion of you doesn't matter anymore. The success of the second location brought unexpected opportunities. Food magazines wanted to feature us. Television producers called about cooking shows. A publisher reached out about a cookbook deal. Each offer felt surreal, like they were talking to someone else. But with success came complications I'd never anticipated. The increased attention meant increased scrutiny. Food bloggers would show up unannounced, ready to tear apart everything we'd built with a single bad review. Corporate chains started sniffing around, making offers to buy us out that made Ben's eyes light up with dollar signs. We could franchise, he said one evening as we reviewed yet another acquisition proposal. Imagine Juniper Hearth bakeries in 50 cities. Imagine 50 places trying to recreate what we've built here, I countered. It's not just about the bread, Ben. It's about the community, the relationships, the fact that I know Mrs. Henderson likes her sourdough sliced thick and that Tommy Morrison comes in every Friday for his mother's birthday cake. You can't scale intimacy, he agreed, setting the papers aside. But you also can't feed the world from 2 locations. It was a conversation we'd been having more frequently as our reputation grew. Ben saw the bigger picture, the potential for genuine impact. I understood his perspective, but something in me resisted the idea of expansion beyond what we could personally oversee. The decision was made for us 3 months later when Janet Kellerman walked through our doors. Janet was the food editor for a major lifestyle magazine, and she'd driven down from Nashville specifically to try our bread. She was a tiny woman with steel gray hair and the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing. I watched nervously as she sampled our signature honey oat loaf, took notes on our cinnamon rolls, and asked probing questions about our sourcing and production methods. The bread is exceptional, she said finally, but that's not why I'm here. I felt my stomach drop. Oh? I'm here because of the story. Single woman, abandoned at the altar, builds a food empire from the ashes of her broken heart. It's compelling. I didn't build this for a story. No, but you built something worth telling a story about. She leaned forward. I want to feature you in our annual Women Who Rise issue. Cover story. It would be huge exposure. The prospect terrified me. I'd gotten comfortable with local success, with being known in our small community. The idea of national attention felt overwhelming. Can I think about it? Of course, but don't think too long. Stories like yours don't stay local forever. That night, I drove out to Ramona's farm. I found her in her lavender fields, harvesting the last blooms before winter set in. She didn't seem surprised to see me. You look troubled, she observed, not pausing in her work. I told her about Janet's offer, about my fears of losing control over the narrative we'd built. What if they get it wrong? What if they make it about Cameron instead of about the bakery? Ramona straightened, a bundle of lavender in her weathered hands. You want to know what I learned in 40 years of making bread? I nodded. You can't control how people taste your work. You can only control how much of yourself you put into it. She gestured toward the fields around us. When I lost my husband, people expected me to mourn forever, to stay small and broken. But grief isn't meant to be a prison, it's meant to be fertilizer. So I should do the interview. I think you should do whatever feels true to who you've become. The Hannah who hid in a wedding dress would have said no. But you're not her anymore, are you? I drove home with her words echoing in my mind. She was right. I wasn't the same person who'd arrived at the juniper hearth in tears and white lace. But more than that, I realized I had a responsibility to tell my own story before someone else told it for me. I called Janet the next morning and agreed to the interview. The photo shoot was surreal. Professional photographers descended on both bakeries, rearranging displays and adjusting lighting to capture the perfect shots. They wanted me in an apron, hands covered in flour, looking wholesome and accomplished. The whole production felt artificial. But I tried to remind myself that this was about reaching people who might need to hear that starting over was possible. The interview itself was more intense than I'd expected. Janet asked probing questions about my relationship with Cameron, about the wedding day itself, about the darkest moments of my recovery. I answered honestly, but I steered the conversation back to the bakery whenever possible. This isn't a story about a failed wedding, I told her. It's a story about discovering what you're actually meant to do with your life. But the wedding is what made it possible. The wedding was just the catalyst. The real story is what happened after. The choice to build something instead of just surviving. The article came out 6 weeks later. The cover featured a gorgeous shot of me pulling bread from the oven, golden light streaming through the windows behind me. The headline read, "From Heartbreak to Hope, How One Woman Turned Her Worst Day into Her Life's Work." I'd been dreading reading it, but Janet had done her job well. The story focused on the bakery, on the community we'd built, on the craft of bread making itself. Cameron was mentioned, but only as the starting point of a much larger journey. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Orders poured in from across the country. Food Network called about a documentary. 3 different publishers reached out about cookbook deals. Our website crashed from traffic within hours of the magazine hitting newsstands. "This is insane," Addie said, looking at the pile of special orders that had accumulated overnight. "We're booked solid for 3 months." I felt a familiar panic rising. Success on this scale meant expectations I wasn't sure we could meet. What if we couldn't handle the volume? What if the quality suffered? What if we lost the intimate connection with our community that made this place special? "We need to hire more people," Ben said, ever practical. "Scale up production, maybe consider that production facility we talked about." "Or," I said slowly, "we need to get comfortable with saying no." It was a radical concept in a culture that equated growth with success. But as I watched the orders pile up, I realized that bigger wasn't necessarily better. We had something special here, something that couldn't be mass-produced or franchised. Over the next month, I made some difficult decisions. We raised our prices to manage demand. We instituted a waiting list for special orders. We stopped shipping nationwide and focused on serving our regional customers well. Some people called these moves short-sighted, but I knew they were necessary to preserve what we'd built. The true test came in December. When Cameron showed up again, I was working late, preparing for our holiday rush, when I heard a knock on the bakery door. Through the glass, I could see his familiar silhouette, and my first instinct was to ignore him. But curiosity won out. He looked older, more weathered than when I'd seen him 8 months earlier. His hair was longer, and he'd lost weight. Most notably, he was wearing a suit I didn't recognize, expensive, well-tailored, nothing like the casual clothes he'd favored when we were together. "I saw the magazine article," he said without preamble. "Congratulations." "Hannah, He stopped, seeming to struggle with what to say. "I made a mistake, not just about the wedding, about everything." I continued shaping roles, not looking up from my work. "You've said that before." "This is different. I've had time to think, to really understand what I lost." "And what did you lose, Cameron?" "You. The life we could have had together." I finally looked up at him. "No, that's not what you lost. You lost the idea of me, the convenient version of me that would have made your life easier." "That's not true, isn't it?" I set down my rolling pin and faced him fully. "Tell me what you know about my life now. Not what you read in a magazine, but what you actually know about who I've become." He faltered, just as he had before. I know you're successful. I know you've built something impressive. Do you know that I wake up every morning excited about my work? Do you know that I've learned to trust my instincts instead of constantly seeking approval? Do you know that I've found a community of people who value what I create? I could learn those things. You shouldn't have to learn them. You should have seen them. I picked up a finished loaf, feeling its weight in my hands. The woman you knew was performing a version of herself that she thought you wanted. The woman I am now doesn't perform for anyone. I've changed too. Have you? Because from where I'm standing, you look exactly the same. Same story, same promises, same expectation that I'll drop everything to accommodate your timeline. He was quiet for a long moment. What would it take? For you to give me another chance? I thought about it seriously, trying to imagine a scenario where we could work. But every path I explored led to the same conclusion. We were fundamentally incompatible, not because he was evil or I was better than him, but because we wanted different things from life. Nothing, I said finally. There's nothing you could do, because this isn't about you anymore. I'm not the same person who needed your validation to feel complete. So that's it? You're just done. I'm grateful. For the wedding that didn't happen, for the heartbreak that forced me to rebuild, for discovering what I'm actually capable of when I stop trying to be what someone else wants. I walked to the cash register and pulled out one of our business cards. On the back, I wrote, "Thank you for setting me free. H." "Here," I said, handing it to him. "This isn't bread, but it's the only thing I have left to give you." He took the card, staring at it like he couldn't quite process what had just happened. This isn't how these stories are supposed to end. No, I agreed. It's how they're supposed to begin. After he left, I finished my prep work in peaceful silence. The bread would rise overnight, and tomorrow we'd bake it fresh for customers who appreciated not just the flavor, but the love and intention that went into every loaf. I climbed the stairs to the apartment above the bakery, which I'd decided to keep as my own space despite having moved into a house closer to the new location. Sometimes I needed to come back here, to remember where it all started. My wedding dress still hung in the closet, but tonight I finally took it down. The fabric felt different in my hands, lighter somehow, less significant. It had been the costume for a role I'd never really wanted to play. I folded it carefully and placed it in a donation box. Someone else could wear it to their happy ending. For me, it had served its purpose as a symbol of everything I'd outgrown. As I prepared for bed, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. 2 years ago, I'd thought my life was over when Cameron called off our wedding. I'd seen his abandonment as the end of my story, when it was actually the beginning of a much better one. The revenge I'd gotten wasn't the kind you see in movies, with grand gestures and dramatic confrontations. It was quieter than that, more profound. It was the revenge of living so fully and authentically that the person who'd hurt you became irrelevant to your happiness. My phone buzzed with a text from Ben. "Early staff meeting tomorrow to discuss the spring menu. Don't forget your notebook." I smiled, already thinking about the new recipes I wanted to try. Lemon thyme bread, maybe, or a savory herb focaccia. The possibilities felt endless, and for the first time in my life, I had the skills and confidence to pursue them all. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, dusting the windows of the bakery with white. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new reasons to be grateful for the unexpected path my life had taken. I pulled my notebook from the nightstand and wrote one final entry. They say the best revenge is a life well lived, but I've learned it's more than that. The best revenge is becoming so completely yourself that you forget why you ever needed revenge in the first place. Tomorrow I'll wake up at 4 a.m. to make bread for people who appreciate it. I'll work with my hands, feed my community, and build something that matters. That's not revenge, that's victory. And with that, I closed the notebook and turned off the light, ready to wake up and do it all again.